So, in preparing this video and essay, I had to fight several first world problems like Apple battery issues, Substack app issues, where the iOS Substack app simply cannot post a new Substack, as well as weeks or months of attempts, doubt, rewrites and general procrastination, writer's block and distraction. I also had to suffer through ever more flaming speeches about action and doing something about the climate crisis. Performances that reminded me of the 2021 appeal by Extinction Rebellion founder Roger Hallam on how to stop the climate crisis in 6 months. 6 months after which, of course, nothing climate-related was stopped in any way, shape or form. It's annoying both that he suggested it might be stopped, and as we shall see in this essay, that he implicitly still suggested it was a crisis. And yet I'm thankful to Roger for finally pushing me over the edge and completing my essay. I also discovered that my Substack is banned from Google, just like the Reddit community our collapse is also unlisted, and even though totalitarian AF, these still sort under the umbrella of first world problems. They are annoying and point in a very dystopic direction, but for now don't affect me or my writer life in any significant way, and they certainly don't deter me. Going south, climate crisis is over. Collapse without a crisis? Once you peel back the voices of climate denial, so that's 99.99% of all people speaking out on the issue. It's already been clear for at least 3 years that the Greenland ice sheet, GIS, has been in collapse, past its tipping point, since the start of the millennium. And the reason we are is, sea ice has been in collapse past its tipping point for about half a century. Sea ice in its turn is of course in collapse due to the sea warming up, and we find the culprit by looking to Mauna Loa and the Keeling curve going sharply up since at least 1958 when regular monitoring began on that Hawaiian mound. So on to the question of whether we're in a climate crisis or not. Climate change, like the comet millions of years before it, may in fact be a mass extinction event without a crisis. For the strict definition of a crisis requires there to be a period of time during which the greater disruption could still somehow be avoided. Let's say that the ocean warming CO2 increase of 1958 didn't just accidentally start at the very moment we began to monitor it, and that more realistically, the increase started before the 1950s, so in, or before, the 1940s. That seems a reasonable assumption. Right. Now, it's also reasonable to assume that no one in the 1940s or 30s were hyper-aware we were in a climate crisis. We may actually have been in a climate crisis at that time, but the we is problematic, as I certainly wasn't born by then, and most of you neither, and as suggested, it wasn't a widespread assumption in any way at the time, but it may still have been the proverbial time to act, only no one had any idea it was even an issue. Now, why can't we just cheat and say oh well, We had no idea back then, but now we know, and thusly, this is the time to act. Well, elementary, Watson. We may act all we want, but there's no longer any realistic hope for stopping climate change in its tracks. There's certainly hope left, right and center, but I said realistic hope, didn't I? And if the window of opportunity closed somewhere there in 1943, then we're 80 years too late, in it. So if you're Gen X like me, and we compare the climate crisis time to act to the Russian and East Greenland village to catch the last ship going south of the autumn before the ocean freezes solid, the dilemma translates to one of lining up, with all your junk, for that ship, or not. If you line up for the ship with all your suitcases, you stand a chance to be a passenger and to be going south. But you'll also have to suffer the abuse of being assumed to be delusional because the last ship to leave the dock was in the 1930s-40s. And I think it was Albert Einstein who said insanity was like trying the same thing over and over again expecting a different outcome. So maybe you confused your wish to go south on a ship with your memory of your grandfather telling you a thrilling story of a ship that went south. So maybe the last ship sailed in 1930. And you're still lining up every single day on the quay with all your stuff, expecting that ship to take you south. The alternative, not lining up on the quay, is of course one where you're free to make preparations, both physical and spiritual, for the epic, Ragnarok scale ride that lies before us. I have proven in this essay that we're not in fact in a climate crisis, but rather in climate collapse, which technically is a post-crisis consequence of not dealing with the crisis while it was still a thing. Simply being unaware of a crisis in its key decisive moments doesn't make it go away. Granted, we, or our predecessors, likely had no clue we were in it, and yet equally granted or obvious, them being blissfully ignorant didn't exactly solve the problem. Thusly we are in collapse.